in Europe, we see that plastic recyclers are going out of business. We see that in the news time and time again, mainly due to the economics and the inflow of cheap virgin plastic into the European Union. However, with the requirement of having to use recycled materials starting the 1st of January 2030, a solution really needs to be found to keep this infrastructure, this recycling infrastructure in place so that we are ready to go with recycled material starting 2030.
Hello and welcome to the latest Sustainability Perspectives podcast, where we hear from industry experts from across the value chain about how they tackle the various challenges the packaging industry faces. My name is Elisabeth Skåre, and today we're going to discuss market concerns around regulatory pressures, particularly in Europe and the US, with 2030 deadlines coming up. We'll discuss ways to tackle these challenges with the right partner. And for this, I'm really pleased to welcome back Elizabeth Starb, who is Global Packaging Sustainability Director at H.B. Fuller. And her position and experience in the industry obviously puts her in a really great position to share her insights with us. So, welcome, Elizabeth. It's great to have you on the podcast today.
And I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So, to get us started, at the time of recording, obviously, we've all just fairly recently returned from Packaging Europe's Sustainable Packaging Summit. And I was curious to hear what were some of your key takeaways from the event.
Yes, it was a great event. I think Utrecht was really a great location for the Sustainable Packaging Summit. And I think overall, we see the readiness of the industry. I think that was mentioned again and again. In particular, big players and directionally brands and producers, they really do know what they need to be doing, what they need to be assessing in terms of their packaging. The other part that I really enjoyed at the event was really all the innovation that we saw in packaging materials. There was a great number of startups presenting at the event. And I think being that innovation and that creative spirit in the packaging industry is tremendously important for our future here in Europe, for the packaging industry and all the options that we will have going forward. And the other part that was very important at the summit, in my opinion, are all the IT and AI solutions to help the industry manage the incredible amount of data that all the producers and brands and suppliers are going to have to manage in order to be in compliance with PPWR going forward.
I wanted to zoom in a bit there, and obviously with PPWR coming into effect in August 2026, and delegated acts are still outstanding, and the industry is being urged to start reviewing and making changes to their packaging portfolio sooner rather than later. But there's obviously still some unclarity there. And at the Sustainable Packaging Summit in Utrecht, we also heard from the EU Commission that PPWR will not be part of the omnibus process. And I wanted to get your take here. How does this affect packaging design and material choices?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And in my personal opinion, it is very good that the PPWR is not part of the omnibus process. On the one hand, the omnibus process promises to bring forward simplification, to make things easier. On the other hand, so much work has already gone into the PPWR. The industry has been very anxious to know where to go starting 2030. And therefore, while the PPWR is not perfect, creating more uncertainty by postponing and making changes is not going to make the situation any better. So, of course, yes, the delegated acts are still outstanding. However, specifically for design for recycling guidelines, the working groups within the CEN, the European Norming Commission, are working at great speed. And industry associations, industry experts from testing institutions, and also the industry are working extremely hard on these design for recycling guidelines in order to have the delegated acts ready to go and to get that clarity that the industry needs. Having said that, directionally, we do know where this is going. Information has been shared by the industry associations, really for each material type, that gives packaging designers a very good idea of what type of material combinations are going to be deemed recyclable going forward from 2030 or not. And so, of course, there are some designs that are in a bit of a gray area, but brands can and do take steps to prepare. So, for example, removing windows from cardboard boxes or taking aluminum out of liquid beverage cartons and moving to rigid plastic containers, replacing colored ones. All these sorts of things are activities and actions, changes that producers and brands can make to their packaging in order to be more prepared for 2030. Also, things like specifying labeling adhesives for the removal in PET recycling, or moving towards monomaterial flexible packaging where that is possible based on the filling goods. These are all steps that producers can take to be more prepared. And first of all, I think producers need to have a good understanding of all the packaging materials and various combinations that they are using. So good data is absolutely key. Going back to the Utrecht Summit, there are many options out there to help producers and brands really get their house in order, understand what all they have, what type of material combinations they are using. And I strongly believe that there's a whole section of packaging where it is very straightforward to know they are going to fall in the ABC category of recyclability in the PPWR. And work should be already well underway to understand that, let's say, straightforward portion, and then make sure that everything is well aligned and ready to go. And then once the delegated acts are published and passed, then the work for the more challenging section where brands and producers are not so sure whether it's going to be compatible, and they haven't been able to make changes, as I mentioned earlier, then that will be the main focus.
And we'll get back to what brands and companies can do a bit later in the podcast. But before that, I also wanted to ask you, what are the main areas of uncertainty for brands and converters right now?
So from an adhesive point of view, it's most certainly the delegated acts with the Design for Recycling guidelines and how certain applications are rated in terms of A, B, and C that are really that main area of uncertainty. And then also the whole aspect of how testing results are translated into A, B, and C. Again, having said that, a lot of work is ongoing today within the working groups of the European Norming Committee. And they are working off the basis of the Design for Recycling guidelines that industry associations for each material type have put together. So that is really an area where there still is some uncertainty, but as mentioned before, directionally, producers and brands do know where they need to go. Another example is how to calculate the packaging minimization as that formula, and how to calculate that has not been defined yet. And that, of course, then entails a lot of work going forward because pack sizes and configurations during transport need to be optimized. And reducing pack sizes should optimize this further throughout the logistics chains. But that, of course, takes time to then model to get to that optimum outcome. And then receiving certification of compliance for the packaging will only be possible once the delegated acts have been passed. Today, we can only say that directionally we would expect a solution to be compliant, but no certifications can be issued today.
Leading on from that, how much testing do companies realistically need to do to be compliant in 2030? And what does this mean for businesses managing thousands of SKUs?
Again, starting with a good database of packaging designs, what all the variation is that a brand or a producer currently has. And I think many SKUs are really down to different print designs or sizes of the same material combinations. So not every size has to be tested, for example, just that material combination. And again, going back to the design for recycling guidelines that already have been published by industry associations, really give a good guideline and instructions to producers of how to design packaging that is then going to be recyclable. And by virtue of its design, whether it's then recyclable A, B, or C, that will then be seen. And then, of course, there is that category of packaging where, by virtue of its design, it's not immediately apparent whether it's going to fall into the ABC category. That's then where testing would be required. So if the producer does have packaging that does not fall into this obvious ABC category and would require testing, then again, I do not believe that every single SKU would need to be tested, but it's really based on the material combination and different size differences or print variations. Those don't all need to be tested. But for example, a coated paper package, that will have to be tested in most cases to ensure the compatibility with the recycling process. On the other hand, I don't think we should underestimate the amount of testing that potentially needs to be done. And I think it will be a test for Europe to see if there's actually enough testing by 2030.
Yeah, something else that definitely needs looking at it more in depth. So we've been talking about Europe and the PPWR quite a lot now, but I also wanted to get your take on how the challenges differ or indeed align between Europe and the US, for example.
So in the EU, we're looking at harmonized regulation. Although the countries are responsible for the eco-modulated EPR fees, for example, by and large, we have harmonized legislation in the European Union. The definitions, for example, are all the same across the EU. By contrast, in the US, this is not the case, and 7 states have now passed EPR legislation. More states are discussing it. And here we see that the definitions differ, and also what type of packaging is included in the EPR legislation. Are they only talking about consumer packaging, for example, or are they also talking about industrial packaging? So California has passed a very comprehensive law, for example, and recyclability in the California law is defined as what can be recycled today in California. And that is, I'd say, comparable to some degree with recyclability at scale by 2030 in the EU legislation. However, for the US, this means that the how to recycle labeling needs to be adjusted to reflect that specification in the California law. And that then also makes it more complex for consumers to know where to put their packaging for recycling. So that's an additional challenge I personally see there. And then the reporting requirements for California are very comprehensive. And there, again, packaging data plays a key role. And I think we come back to that time and time again. And it also stands out in the California law that the flexible packaging has essentially been deemed non-recyclable in California, as it is currently not recycled across the state of California. There are, of course, numerous flexible packaging recycling facilities in the US, but not in California. So now if you go into a supermarket in California, you find aisles filled with flexible packaging. So potentially all of that packaging would need to be replaced, and that is a huge task. So in contrast, in Europe, we see that plastic recyclers are going out of business. We see that in the news time and time again, mainly due to the economics and the inflow of cheap virgin plastic into the European Union. However, with the requirement of having to use recycled materials starting the 1st of January 2030, a solution really needs to be found to keep this infrastructure, this recycling infrastructure in place so that we are ready to go with recycled material starting 2030. So effectively having to bridge the next 4 years.
I wanted to come back from the US, but ask you a sort of broader question again and gauge your assessment of what the current mood is in the market right now. Do you feel a sense of panic with brands and converters?
No, I think panic is a very strong word that would indicate that people are running in all sorts of direction. And I don't think that that's the case. Concern and worry, most definitely. But I do think that companies have many options to get the necessary information. And industry associations really have been doing a great job of sharing this information and trying to get it out there into the marketplace. And whether this is industry associations on the European level or also on a national or local level, there really are many services to support brands and producers to get their packaging information organized and to understand what needs to be done, material by material. And this is also reaching medium and smaller sized companies, in my opinion. However, it's not a time to stick your head in the sand. It's a time for action. But the sentiment of panic is a bit too strong.
That's reassuring to hear. And I also wanted to get your take on why there is still so much lack of clarity around specific requirements. And obviously, how do you think that these evolving details make planning difficult for companies?
So I personally believe that this all comes back to the design for recycling guidelines. The industry associations that represent an entire supply chain of a material like paper or plastic, glass, metal, they have already published their design for recycling guidelines. And they're also working hard in the working groups of the SEN with more experts from the industry. And they are really coming together to generate that needed clarity. This is a tremendous amount of work because our packaging is complex. Packaging has been evolving and developing for decades, looking at being optimized, whether that's for weight, for shelf life, etc. So there is a lot of variability. And the design for recycling guidelines and the testing protocols, they really should be as objective as possible. And that's really where this balance needs to be found. And that's why the work in the SEN working groups is so very important. However, while there still is that uncertainty, as I've already mentioned, there is a lot of information already out there, already available that companies can be working with. And again, they can get as prepared as possible, sorting their data, getting their packaging specifications in order, making sure that they know what all the materials they are using, and making sure that this is well sorted and well categorized. And then taking first steps. So there are definitely easy replacements that can be made, so that packaging configuration is definitely going to fall into that A or B recyclability category, for example. As I mentioned before, replacing colored rigid packaging containers with transparent ones, for example. Taking the aluminum out of liquid beverage cartons, moving to monomaterial flexible packaging where possible, taking windows out of cardboard boxes, those sorts of things can all already be done. And then companies and brands are definitely moving in the right direction.
And I wanted to zoom in a bit on your particular area of expertise and ask you, what role do you think adhesives have to play in this evolving situation?
Adhesives are essentially present in most packaging applications, really, because they hold the packaging together and give it a lot of its functionality. So we need to ensure that our adhesive solutions are compatible with the recycling process, whether that is enabling a high fiber yield in paper recycling, making sure that the adhesive separates out and does not cause any issues in the production of recycled paper, for example, or formulating our adhesives for labeling so that they wash off in the PET recycling process to generate high quality recycled PET. Also, making sure that the laminating adhesives are compatible with polyethylene or polypropylene monomaterials so that they can go into mechanical recycling, for example. So all those things are activities that we as an adhesive producer are already engaging in, are working on. And at H.B. Fuller, we have invested heavily in our in-house testing capabilities so that we can work with our customers and be developing new adhesive solutions so that we can give our customers the confidence that our adhesive and coating solutions are going to be compatible with the design for recycling guidelines going forward, and so that we can also make sure that these are going to be the right solutions for packaging under PPWR going forward. Now, having said that, we cannot give a certificate. We are not a testing institute. And of course, as long as the delegated acts have not been passed, no certificate of compliance can be given. We can only say that as the situation is today, we would expect that they are going to be in compliance and be part of a packaging that is going to be recycled under ABC in the PPWR going forward.
Towards the end of our podcast, I was keen to get your perspective and see what your opinion on what do brands and producers need to specify for future compliant packaging and what makes it future-proof.
Well, here I really think all components of the package and their combination need to be looked at. And in some cases, the adhesive properties regarding the recycling process need to be specified. So, for example, for PET labeling, there are adhesives on the market that will wash off and have the label come off during the PET recycling process. Now, that needs to be specified. Also, for flexible packaging, for example, there are laminating adhesives that are suitable for monomaterial structures and then work very well in the mechanical recycling process. That, again, needs to be specified. I think if you're closing a box with packaging hot melt adhesive, many studies have shown, and there are guidelines that show that those hot melt packaging adhesives separate out very well in the repulping process, and those really aren't any issue whatsoever. So there are many options and many steps a brand or producer can take to be prepared. And talking with your adhesive supplier, such as ourselves, H.B. Fuller, really is an important step in being prepared.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to wrap up by asking you if you could give one piece of advice to brands and converters preparing for 2030, what would it be?
So without wanting to sound like a broken record, I think information and data is really the first step. Looking at what you are dealing with and what the variations are of packaging materials and packaging material combinations is really key. Having a good handle on what you are looking at. And then secondly, the industry associations for all packaging materials are a great source of information. And then, of course, your suppliers. So as an adhesive supplier, we are heavily engaged with our customers to support them with the necessary information concerning the adhesives that they are using and what options they should be looking at going forward.
Yes, some great advice there. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So, that brings us to the end of today's podcast and just leaves me to thank you very much, Elizabeth, for being here today and for sharing your insights.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, as always, speaking with you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And the Sustainable Packaging Summit 2025 is now finished, but we still have quite a lot of podcasts and LinkedIn live sessions coming out as part of it this year. So make sure you check that out. Thank you very much and goodbye.